Offshore. Okay, it's a word that definitely brings certain images to mind, doesn't it? Maybe hidden money, maybe some kind of mystery. But what's really going on when we talk about offshore finance? Today, we're not really chasing those shadows. We're doing a deep dive using material from FinCrime Intelligence to properly unpack it. Our mission really is to get behind the jargon, understand what offshore actually is, the legitimate side, and also why it's so important when we talk financial crime.
That's exactly right. Offshore is, well, it's loaded, isn't it? Often with negative baggage. But essentially, it just means doing financial stuff, setting up companies, making transactions in places with, let's say, more attractive tax or regulatory rules. Think of those places often labeled tax havens. Now, this can offer real legal benefits, things like lower taxes, maybe more privacy, but unfortunately, those same features, they can be exploited for illicit activities, and that's why regulators are watching so closely.
Okay, so that's the basic definition. Places with friendlier rules. So why would a legitimate business or even an individual actually choose to go offshore? Our source material from FinCrime Intelligence points to a few key reasons. Tax optimization seems like a big one. Just, legally using lower tax rates elsewhere.
Absolutely. For big international companies especially, it can just be a smart way to manage their global tax bill, all within the law. It's about finding, I suppose, the most efficient legal setup for how they operate globally. But it's not just tax. The source also talks about asset protection.
Hmm.
So structuring things to maybe shield assets from potential lawsuits or perhaps political instability back home.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. If things feel uncertain where you are, protecting your assets somewhere else seems, well, prudent. And what about regulatory efficiency? That sounds like maybe fewer hoops to jump through.
Exactly. Some offshore spots have rules that are maybe less complex or more flexible. This can be really appealing for certain businesses like investment funds or maybe holding companies. Think about a tech startup moving fast, maybe setting up is quicker offshore, less red tape slowing them down. And finally, the source mentions global investment access. Offshore structures can make it easier to pool money from different countries and manage cross-border investments, sort of connecting the dots in the global financial system.
Okay, so these all sound like potentially valid business reasons depending on the situation. But the material is also pretty clear that the potential for misuse, well, it's significant.
Oh, absolutely. The very things that make them attractive legally, less transparency, sometimes complex legal setups, those can be twisted by people involved in financial crime. And if enforcement in that jurisdiction is maybe a bit weak, well, that just makes the problem worse.
Right. So we've covered the why for legitimate use. Let's pivot to the risks.
hmm
What are the main financial crime worries linked to offshore activities, according to FinCrime Intelligence?
Well, the source lays out quite a few. Top of the list is, unsurprisingly, money laundering. Using offshore shell companies, maybe trusts, to hide where dirty money actually came from makes it incredibly hard for authorities to trace it back. Think of like a company that exists only on paper, no real business, just a layer to hide behind.
Right, creating distance between the crime and the cash. What else?
Next up is tax evasion. And it's important, like you said, to separate this from legal tax optimization. Evasion is illegal. It's hiding income or assets, often using the secrecy some offshore places offer, specifically to avoid paying taxes owed. The source definitely flags this as a huge issue for governments worldwide.
And sanctions evasion, too. That keeps coming up in the news.
Precisely. Offshore structures can be used to move money or assets around in ways that try to dodge international sanctions, basically undermining what those sanctions are trying to achieve. The source also points to corruption and embezzlement, politically exposed persons, PEPs, potentially using offshore accounts or companies to hide or move stolen public funds.
Wow, yeah. Using these places to cover up theft from the public purse, that's deeply concerning. And the last one mentioned is trade-based laundering. Sounds a bit more complex.
It is, yeah. It involves manipulating trade documents, invoices, shipping details. You might overstate the value of goods or understate them or describe them falsely. Offshore companies can be part of this chain, helping to disguise the movement of illicit cash as legitimate trade payments. Like maybe you overpay massively for a shipment between two companies you secretly control, one offshore, just to move value across borders.
Okay, that paints a pretty clear picture of why regulators are so focused on this area. So what's being done about it? The source talks about transparency efforts, regulatory initiatives.
Yes, there's been a really big international push for more transparency. The Financial Action Task Force, FATF, they have recommendations pushing countries to make sure they know who really owns companies, the beneficial owners, and that authorities can get that info. That's key to seeing through those shell company layers.
Makes sense. You need to know who you're actually dealing with. What other big initiatives are there?
The OECD's Common Reporting Standard, CRS, is a major one. That involves countries automatically swapping financial account information with each other. It makes it much, much harder to hide money offshore for tax evasion because your home tax authority is more likely to find out. Then you have things like the EU's list of non-cooperative jurisdictions. It basically names and shames places that aren't meeting transparency standards.
So kind of public pressure and maybe a signal for banks to be extra careful.
Exactly that. And lastly, the source mentions corporate transparency acts, like in the US and UK. These laws are starting to require companies, even domestic ones with offshore links, to report who their ultimate beneficial owners are, trying to lift the veil domestically, too.
And for the banks and financial institutions themselves. Sounds like they're on the front line here. The article stresses enhanced due diligence.
Oh, definitely. They're expected to do deeper checks, ask more questions when customers or transactions involve offshore elements, especially if it's linked to higher risk jurisdictions or industries. It means really digging to understand who's behind it all, why the offshore structure is being used, and where the money is coming from and going.
So how does this actually play out in, say, an anti-money laundering compliance department day to day? The source touches on offshore structures in AML compliance.
Yeah, offshore connections are, well, they have to be a core part of any decent AML program now. Like we said, identifying the real beneficial owners is crucial. AML teams need processes to really scrutinize the purpose of offshore accounts. Is it legitimate? Does it make business sense? Or are there red flags? And they absolutely need to monitor transactions involving known secrecy havens or high-risk places.
What sort of red flags would trigger alerts in these AML systems?
The source gives examples like weird patterns, maybe circular payments, money going out and coming back with no clear business reason, or huge rapid fund transfers, or maybe dealing with shell companies that seem purely passive, no obvious operations. AML processes also need to factor in regulatory guidance on tax havens, high-risk countries generally, and shell company risks, basically your transaction monitoring and how you risk rate customers. Offshore indicators have got to be built into that. It's essential for trying to prevent financial crime.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive then. Seems offshore is, well, complicated. There are legitimate uses for financial planning, tax optimization, asset protection, but at the same time, huge risks for financial crime because of the potential secrecy and complexity. And the global trend is definitely towards forcing more transparency and tightening regulations to try and manage those risks.
That sums it up nicely. It's that constant tension, isn't it, between legitimate financial efficiency and the dark side of illicit finance. And as the rules keep changing and countries share more information, everyone involved in international finance, banks, businesses, individuals, really needs to stay alert and understand these risks.
This has been really useful, digging into the details beyond just the headlines. It's definitely more complex than just, a suitcase full of cash on a tropical island. It does leave you wondering, though. With financial crime always evolving and the regulations trying to keep pace, how can ordinary people or businesses make sure they don't accidentally get caught up in something illicit linked to offshore structures? What are the really important questions they should be asking, maybe themselves or their advisors, to make absolutely sure they're staying on the right side of things?